All right. Well, first of all, I am delighted to be talking to you, Richard. And honestly, I didn't know much or really anything about your work when your publicist contacted me, but I saw within literally seconds, as I read through your bio, just the first couple of paragraphs, that you and I are fellow travelers because you do so many different things. And I always say it's a good thing for the world that I wasn't someone who loved nuclear physics because I probably would have become a physicist and blown up the world already. Because,
Just to see if it worked. What's this
yes,
big red button do? Wait a minute. Let's press this. Yeah.
exactly right. And, anytime I really enjoy something, in the popular culture, if I possibly can do it, I'm out there doing it. So, how did you fall into that kind of very productive, multidimensional life?
One thing led to another is the short answer. Quite often I advise young writers just invent a detective and write 50 stories for him or her and stick with it and make yourself a name that way and dig your groove deep, and then everyone will know what you do. Because, coming to publishing, which is late in my life, I'm publishing fiction now, or I'm being published by a proper publisher rather. Um, yeah, they don't publish books, they publish authors. And not despite having 40-year career in script writing and other things, I'm not an author. I'm not a name. So it's quite difficult to get established as a name. So if you can get your 50 detective stories written and get your groove, then the 51st will definitely be published, unless you're falling off the standard you've set for yourself. It's actually been interesting spreading myself wide. I don't like to say necessarily thin, but doing everything from video discs to libretti for operas to sitcom and radio and sketch comedy, various other things, screenplays, of course, a lot of script editing, some narrative non-fiction books. And finally, I found my bliss as a writer because I've always thought the highest form of writing, apart from poetry, is narrative. Because if you think about it, opera is a singer's medium, a composer's medium. Stage is an actor's medium. Film is a director's medium. TV's actors meet as well as directors. Uh, Writing a novel is just you and the reader. And you're telling the story as well as showing it. And my editor's always saying, no, no, this isn't just telling a story. Show it, put it in a scene. She's great that way. So you bring it to life in a scene, but you are actually narrating the story as it goes along. And to me, narrative fiction is the form of writing I've always wanted to do. And to discover my bliss at this late stage of my life is fantastic because I've always known how to write. I just never knew what to write in terms of narrative. And then this idea fell out of the sky one day and I was off to the races.
Well, I'm glad you did that. And I understand completely what you're saying because, as someone I've written a lot of nonfiction, but even there, I can't always quite do what I want. And I have to have evidence and like annoying footnotes and references. There is something about fiction writing that is very liberating and really
Exactly.
thrilling because you are the complete person in control of that fiction writing. Although, of course, as I'm sure you know, and if you want to share any stories with our listeners and viewers, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, when you have an editor, it's very much of a mixed blessing. Ideally, right, an editor will read your manuscript and come up with some interesting little things or even some major things that you need. But I don't know about you. The way I tend to feel, anytime an editor gets back to me with anything other than very trivial, minor suggestions, the first thing I do is I curse the editor out. And then I come to realize, well, who knows, maybe there is some wisdom in what the editor is suggesting.
Well, that's got to say that's heroically immature of you, Paul. That really is. You've got to get over that. I'll get to that in a minute. But your first point about narrative nonfiction, you're stuck with the facts. One book I wrote was the biography of Milt Oken, a very eminent music producer who produced Peter, Paul and Mary and John Denver and blah blah blah. Was my father-in-law, and I wanted to get his funny stories down before he died. And so I had, it's not, it's about him. My job is to stay out of the way, edit it, put it all together. You're constrained by the facts. The other narrative non-fiction books I've written, there are facts involved. There's people I interview, there's stories. With fantasy, with fiction, especially with fantasy, you can go anywhere and do anything, and you can lay yourself open to letting the story tell you what it is. You don't have to push it in any direction. In fact, pushing a story is always a terrible idea. You want to be able to sit back, you've got to be able to stand off it and figure out what's going on and do your outlines as you go along. And sometimes you're in the belly of the beast, just being carried along by it. But it's what it wants, not what you want. And for you to uh, 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 have its automatic reaction to your editor that, that's how dare you, is that's really not, that's you deciding what you want, not what the story wants. Because the editors, I've said this to people when I'm editing, well, why is this here? And an inexperienced writer will say, because I like it. So I sort of say, well, actually, I don't care what you like. The story doesn't like it. If you like it, put it in another story where it fits. But here, it's just in the way. So, that particular scene goes somewhere else. Once you get the hang of editing, it's absolutely where the gold lies. And I'm lucky enough to have Leslie Robin, who's just brilliant, the executive editor at Kasich, Science Fiction and Fantasy, as my editor, and she had the most incredible, insightful ideas. She's very creative. She came up with stuff. She said, "Look, this thing here, this artifact, that's a real character. More, you've already started it. Make more of a dialogue between the person who owns it and the thing, and then it becomes a real double act. And it's really great that she spots that. Says, go. She doesn't say, cut back and don't do this, and all those things that are necessary. And if I may go back to my first job as a scriptwriter back in the early days, there's a producer called James Gatwood, who was head of Portman Productions, and my agent Jill Foster sent me to him. Said James is the only producer in London who'll give an unknown writer a shot. I had a few credits, but nothing, just regional TV, and went to meet him, and he gave me the book to adapt and a sample outline that another writer had written for another book. So I went away, studied it, said, I can do this. Came back with the outline. He said, okay, you got the gig. So I wrote the script, came back with it, sent it in to him. He called me in for a script meeting. And I can still remember the moment, but not the feeling, because that's long gone, as he opened his script, and it was covered in blue ink. Lines, arrows, circles, and I don't feel it now, but at the time I just felt like I'd been disemboweled by a cassowary. What's he done to my mortal words? Which is, so I knew better than to say anything. So I sat back and took my notes and went through it with him. And it's not about me, it's about the work. It's not like an actor going in for an interview and being rejected. I don't like you. That's very personal. This is, I don't like this, or I don't, oh, fix this, or more of that, or whatever. So he gave me these notes, and I staggered out of there thinking, oh my God, I addressed the notes, sent in the script, went back for the next meeting a few days later. And there are about 3 notes for the entire script. And he gave me the rest of the series to write. So that's what you have to do. You have to learn how to get out of your own way, not be precious, learn how to be edited, learn how to edit, and take the win.
Well, that's a very good point of view. And you're fortunate to have had just on your own work such good editors. I guess I would disagree to some extent. For me, the editor is not necessarily a spokesperson for what the story is trying to tell the world, but basically another, one hopes, intelligent, sensitive mind who has her or his views of what that is. And then the question is which views should prevail. And
There's no one size fits all. You're absolutely right.
yeah.
I have this mantra, which is a lie, completely untrue, is that there's no such thing as a bad note. If you get that into your head, then when you get a bad note back from the producer or the editor, it makes no sense on the script. You realize I just didn't explain it properly. He didn't get it. She didn't get it. Why? So you go away, you rewrite it the way it's meant to be, go back to them and say, that note you gave me was great. Look, I fixed it. Quite often they'll go, thank you. That's great. And other times, there's so many stories about this. Do you remember My Favorite Martian?
Of course.
Of course. There's a legendary note from an executive, studio executive, on a script written, so somebody's photographed it, it's probably on the internet. line circled, and the note is, a Martian wouldn't say that. That's not really a great note. So sometimes you get people who really don't know what they're doing involved in the production process, and but other times you've got to make them happy, and and you're all working together. And sometimes you're working with people who are not a good fit necessarily. And you might not be the good fit, but you've just got to take what you can learn. And for example, if you're being paid to do, which I've been several times, to do things that I had little hope that would be really good. I just thought they might work. Come in as a scriptwriter and try and fix things, for example, or contribute. Then the moment you finish that job, don't sit around waiting for the next paid job. That's bought you the time to write the good stuff. That's a lesson it took me a while to learn. Now you can sit down and write. You've got 6 months of wages paid by these people who you've just bust your backside for and came up with okay work or whatever. Now, this is where you do the good work that's for you, and that is what pays off eventually.
Well, I agree with you. And I also agree that authors of any kind of work have to always try as hard as possible not to get real life get in the way of their writing, which isn't real life. You're going into a different world. Everyone has social commitments, professional commitments, et cetera, et cetera. And all too often, writers torpedo themselves, I think, by paying too much attention to that. But before we continue talking about your writing and your new novel, I can't resist. So you were Milt Oaken's son-in-law, is that
Yes,
what?
I still am, although he's no longer with us.
Yeah, well, that's
Been married
amazing.
40 years now to Jenny.
Wow. Well, I just
And
have to
she did that artwork, but that's our
say,
daughter. That's an artwork she created
uh,
of our
very
daughter. Our daughter's weird hairstyle one day. Jenny's a photographer and set designer and very
uh,
talented.
it's nice.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I have to tell you, I'm a huge fan of Peter, Paul, and Mary, John Denver, all of them. In fact, just last night, and in fact, in the last couple of days, I mean, this is like because I didn't, maybe I even saw somewhere, and that's what got me to start listening to this, that you wrote a book about Milt Oaken. But just last night, I was listening to Early Morning Rain and all its
Yeah.
renditions, starting with Gordon Lightfoot, then Peter, Paul, and Mary, and a couple of other people. And what has long been, one of my all-time favorite groups, which not that many people have heard of nowadays, it was the Starland Vocal.
Yes. The one hit wonder.
That's
A
right.
very interesting story in my biography of Milt. It's basically his stories. I stay out of his way and sort of interview him a bit. The Starland Vocal Band were a one-hit wonder for one reason, is that big hit they did. And Milt wrote this amazing fugal piece at the end of it. The music goes very fugal. He's the arranger as well as the producer. That one hit wouldn't go away. It was played again and again and again. So when the record company had the follow-up, which was Milt said was a decent record, and tried to release it, they just kept playing the old one, Afternoon Delight, again and again and again. So the new never got a look in.
Uh,
Uh,
that's too bad. I mean, Bill and Taffy
they were great. Well, Taffy,
very talented.
they wrote "Take Me Home, Country Roads"
That's right.
for John, and John came in and wrote the bridge on it, and that was originally called oh God, I can't. No, no, sorry, yeah, I can't remember what it was called, but somebody had already released a song called "Country Roads," another singer.
Oh,
So Milt said, "Change it to Take Me Home, Country Roads."
yeah.
That title. So he's very smart about things like that.
By the way, I just have to say, I know you're British, but I've noticed you're talking about songs and works that have the same name. I've had like three or four examples. The most recent being my first novel, which did pretty well. It's called The Silk Code. So I was less than thrilled to see just like 2, 3 years ago, somebody came out with a novel called The Silk Code, and it's a writer in the UK. And
That's fine. That's why you can't. Thank goodness you cannot copyright titles.
exactly.
Otherwise, we'd have nothing to do. I mean, we'd have nothing to write. We'd have to call them Novel 48B or something. There are plenty of novels with the same names.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
But still,
Yeah, it's annoying, especially when you've thought of a good one.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Um, I will, by the way, just one more thing about Bill and Taffy. Have you heard you probably have. I just came across it recently. There is a missing verse in the well-known version of Take Me Home Country Roads that,
Really? Oh.
yes, that John Denver didn't sing, but Bill and Taffy sang it a couple of times, before they gave it to John Denver. And I'll send you a link to
These
that.
things get cut down. It's like Puff
Yeah.
the Magic Dragon that was sitting on Lenny Lipton's desk. I think it was actually still in his typewriter when he was at college. And Peter Yarrow, who'd been at that same college and came in and to the room and saw it and thought this will make a good song. So he took it away and came up with the bridge. But the whole song, the rest of the song was is entirely written by Lenny, who had no idea he was writing a song. So it goes into the mix. Milt might have cut that verse because there were too many. I mean, he worked with Laura Nero, who simply wouldn't cut her songs down to commercial length. Milt said it was absolutely, heartbreaking because she was so talented. She could have been so commercial. Her non-commercial songs are brilliant, but she just was unable to write anything less than 9 minutes long. Milt managed to cut one down that was, I think, her only hit. But I mean, talking Peter, Paul, and Mary, Noel sent us the other day a link to a new song he done called something on the mandolin Joe, like a mandolin with a Joe on the end of it. And it's
Uh-huh.
beautiful. I mean, he's so talented. He plays this song, and it's about politics. There's a donkey in the chamber and an elephant in the hall, and all that sort of stuff. And really well written. And he plays it on the mandolin Joe. And you just realize how good these people were.
Well, they were, and this is yet
Still are.
not to go too. They definitely still are, and not to go too far off track. But this is like what Hegel was talking about when he talked about the spirit of an age. That for some reason, which he couldn't explain, he was just sort of identifying it. At certain times in history, certain things come together, and they go across a wide variety of art forms.
Right.
You have impressionistic painting, impressionistic music, impressionistic poetry, and so on. And in the 1960s, there was something that happened then that just brought out, the best in all these people. And
There's so many threads coming together, European folk music, particularly British, English and Irish and Scottish folk music was coming into Northern America, so the northern parts of America, New York and that, the Pete Seeger and all that. Well, meanwhile, it had been going over to the south for a couple of 100 years and became bluegrass, which I play the bluegrass banjo, but I don't have one out of the case here. Otherwise, I'd massacre a tune for you. But a song like Devil's Dream is actually Deal Among the Tailors, a Scottish reel, uh, repurposed, and Bill Keith played it, and everyone plays it. I play it even. It's a lovely fiddle tune. We're all cross-fertilizing, and that is, yeah, the zeitgeist is when things come together. Suddenly, there's a whole fashion for something, and everyone's doing it. This year it's kombucha. No, that was last year.
God help us.
I think it's very exciting. I love new stuff. I
Yeah.
like to try and keep an open mind. It's difficult because I think most of us are probably, we get our opinions and stick to them. But I love being proved wrong in argument. When someone says, I say something and somebody takes that point and demonstrates why what I've demonstrated is inaccurate. What I've said is inaccurate. And I find that thrilling rather than sitting on my soapbox, only believing what I believe and not listening to facts, which is happening a lot in America at the moment and in England, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah,
People
probably
just
probably
no,
worse
not
in America. We're
not
we're
not
we're on the
yeah.
road to fascism here, and it's pretty frightening, really.
Well, let's get the guitars out. Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger. This machine kills fascists. Music will solve that problem.
Yeah, well, they even use music though, unfortunately. So it's a
Yeah,
question.
they use music that they're not. I love the way that Trump's rallies are. All the
Exactly.
stars say, "Please don't use that because I disagree with you."
That's right.
Uh,
Yeah. Well, this happens all the time. The former governor of New Jersey, whose name escapes me, he was you might remember his name. He was originally running against Trump, and
Christie,
yeah,
Chris
right.
Christie. Yeah,
Chris Christie, he probably still is a huge Bruce Springsteen
you're
fan.
right. Yeah, and Springsteen said, "No, thanks." Nope,
Exactly right. Which takes a lot of courage because it's certainly good publicity, but Springsteen didn't
not
really.
really. I
Yeah.
think it's the wrong sort of publicity. It's like, I explain to people when I'm doing plays or comedians. I say, look, that's the wrong sort of laugh. That
Yeah,
and they say you got to laugh. You got to laugh. It's the wrong sort of laugh. They're embarrassed. It's not a good laugh. They're being nice to you because you made a joke that falls flat on its backside. So yeah, it's the wrong sort of publicity for the
yeah.
boss. But he can. My friend Alison, who was at high school with my wife, she knew Bruce when he was a nobody, and he used to leave her and her friend, who I think was his girlfriend at the time, um, voice. You remember those cassette machines with the voice
Yes,
messages on it?
well,
All
I
those.
still have one.
Right. Well, and then some years later, when he was famous, he said, "You still have those songs, right? Those things." He'd call up and sing something. I said, "Oh no, it just got recorded over."
Yeah.
He said, "I regret that now because they would have been good archival material for a great career."
No, absolutely. A long, long time ago, when I just finished my doctoral dissertation, I sent it up to Marshall McLuhan,
Oop.
and he and I had already been working together. And then my wife and I, it was like in August, went away for 3 weeks. And of course, we didn't have, anything remotely like cell phones or smartphones or whatever, but we did have a primitive answering machine.
Uh,
And when we got back home, I found a message from Marshall McLuhan. Hello, Paul and Tina. I'm reading the dissertation. And I did manage to save that. And
uh,
finally made a digital copy of it. And it's actually up on this podcast, Light On, Light Through, that our conversation, for anyone who's listening, will see on on the Light On, Light Through site.
yeah,
But
we did that. Jenny records all our cell phone messages going back to my father, baffled English, and saying, "Hello, oh, how do I work this thing?" But when my mother-in-law died, only like 3 or 4 years ago, Placido Domingo, who's devoted to Milt because Milt made his crossover career and made sure that he was hired as head of the LA Opera. Um, Placido called up at a very difficult time for him and left a 5 minute message, heartfelt message about Rosemary, Milt's wife, and how much she and he had meant to him. And that's a class act, that is. And that's really much appreciated. And so we have that on record.
yeah, I mean, it's amazing to think about the fact. I mean, obviously, a lot of people have thought about this. It applies to photography as well. That, up until a certain time in pretty recent human history, there were just no audio recordings, period. And
Extraordinary.
then if you had like another 50 years back into the past or 75 years, up until that time, there were no photographs. And we've
Uh,
become so used to, having these real images and real sounds, although of course they're now being attacked by AI and fake images that
well,
look
we're
real.
flooded with it now. I mean, this interview will never go away.
Yeah.
If you look back at the dawn of our language in, 900 AD, when Beowulf was composed and written in English, that's the only major work of that size surviving from our roots, and it's an absolute masterpiece, and it is, of course, fantasy fiction. If we can return to the theme of
Yes,
that, so that was a neat one.
that was very good.
Steering back to
Good,
no, but
good.
I adored Beowulf. It's a great story. It's got a dragon in it and a hoard of treasure and orcs and a monster that kills people at night in the warrior's mead hall and the hero who dives to the bottom of the lake and wrestles with its mother. It's just heroic stuff. And fantasy fiction's been with us since Gilgamesh.
That's absolutely right. Well, one could say that the Bible is a form of fantasy fiction.
Well, they're all stories that we
Yeah,
tell each
yeah,
other to make sense of the world. Life doesn't make sense, but stories do. And the Bible is, all religions are stories.
that's
I'm
right.
not saying they're not true. I have no idea. Some of them seem to me to be completely absurd, the stories that are told, and some of them are histories that are best forgotten.
Yep.
I mean, look at Palestine and Israel, not Elizabethan.
Yeah.
Today, I mean, there's been smiting going on there for thousands of years. It's just utterly horrific and really, really sad. Um, yes,
Yeah.
upsetting.
So, no, I agree with you. I mean, when COVID hit, and then we'll get finally back to your novel. When COVID hit, though, I mean, my wife and I were thinking, wow, this is pretty horrible. What time does this evoke? I don't know, maybe September 11th. Neither of us were alive in World War II. I'm sure that was a horrible time. We, the good guys, won, but imagine what people were thinking in 1941, 42. That
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
good. but I mean the good guys would win. But it seems to me that all that's happened since COVID is now a lot of other things have gotten much worse.
Oh,
Uh,
I think it's honestly, as we get older, things do look worse. When you're young, you're more optimistic. Although the generations that are following ours have been much less lucky in terms of what's available to them. And the rising tide that lifted all boats after the post-war boom has let down the later generations because there simply isn't uh, the resources aren't left, and a lot of the wealth has been spent or gone into the pockets of the elderly and the wealthy. So I'm not sure that it's quite as optimistic as we used to be, but yeah. But still, I think the world is improving in many ways all the time. And I particularly I mean, the internet is a fantastic resource, even though it's full of morons and trolls, but so what?
No, exactly. So what the internet is one of the bright lights because this way everyone has a voice, and if everyone has a voice, we're bound to get some horrendous voices there. But that's okay. That's not what the problem is. The problem is deeper than that. But
Yeah.
let's talk about New Rock, New Roll. First of all, I just want to compliment you for a great, savvy title. When I read it, it got like so quiet in the room I could hear a pun drop. And
Oh dear.
um,
Very, very good. You've actually, I've got one here. I was just at a conference, so I had this on the desk. You, people will see that that's the book cover.
yeah, good.
ROLE, see, because it's based on, well, it emerged from my love of internet role-playing games, computer games, because I mean, you're so free in them. You're the hero of your own story. So you're not watching some actor doing it for you. You're in it. You're steering your avatar around. You design your avatar, and so we're whoever we want to be in a game. And sometimes you've got, you know, 20 people in your ear and you're galloping around making mischief to fight against 20 other people or to take them on or steal their whatever, raid their castle. They're real people all over the world just like you are. They just happen to be in the enemy team. Or sometimes it's just a game with you against the environment. But what those games have shown me, and I've come to love them, is the amazing just the landscapes you can wander around in. The environment is so beautiful. The designs are so stunning, whether you're in outer space or some sword and sorcery fantasy world, which is where my books are set. I mean, it's not about gaming, it's not in a game at all. The premise is that three people win the world championship of gaming live online, and the next thing you know, the hero's standing in a field with a sword and shield going, "What the happened? Where am I?" And and there are wolves chasing him. He's got to survive if he's going to find out why and see if the other two guys in his team are there. One is an Australian orc, and the other's an Asian American sword dancing, dual wielding girl. And they're nowhere to be seen. He's all alone. He's being chased, and then he gets captured, and it gets worse. So it's a real world, an alternative world story. You don't have to know anything about gaming to get into the story.
And this actually is the first novel in a series, and having read the novel,
Yes.
certainly see there's a great story there.
Well, I've left it open at the end, so there's the sequel naturally follows. I get very upset when I read a book that I love, and somebody's obviously persuaded the writer with some money to write a sequel, and there's no possible sequel available to him or her because they've closed the story so perfectly that there's nowhere else to go. So I made sure that I've got a universe to play in. Now I've written 4 books in the series. This is like getting back to talking about writing. I wish I knew how to take my own advice half the time because when I'm talking to people, like on a panel last week in Boston, talking about what writers should do and how to get over this and how to help yourself and how to do your outlines. And I'm floundering around at the beginning of book 5, just like I floundered around at the middle of book whatever. You get to these points where you go, what's the story trying to tell me? Where's it going? And your advice is always, well, the answer's not there, but you're looking at somewhere else. Yet, whenever you get to the position where you could really do with advice, you think, well, I gave this advice to people just last week. Why aren't I listening to myself? What's the answer? And of course, I don't know. Until you've written it, you don't know what you've written.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I never know what I'm going to write until I write it. And I was going to ask you, I mean, obviously everyone does what works best for themselves. And I would never have written anything if I had to write an outline for what I was writing. I have outlines in my head, but for me at least, I like when I'm writing to like create it fresh and not feel I have to be bound by the outline that I already created. Uh,
I couldn't agree more. But the thing is, Paul, you have to do both. Uh, it's very useful to have gone through a career as a script writer, where if you think about it, in Hollywood in the old days, they said, and this was after talking pictures were invented. In the old days, it was just the script had no dialogue in it at all. So that's all structure. In the old days, they say, well, we'll write the scenario and then we'll add the dialogue. Now, coming from playwriting and script writing, sketch writing, and so on, which is all dialogue, that seemed to be weird. How can you write an outline of something that you don't know what it is yet? But you actually learn. You need to do it if you're doing a series because everyone else in the writer's room needs to know what you're all doing. You have the Bible that's created, and it's a group effort. So if you're doing some jobs, you have to create the outline first for the producer. When you're writing for yourself, you can do both. And what I do is I write the novel as I go along and I can create the outline. So I'm in the book and then I pull focus, get back on the top of the mountain, look down at the whole forest and just write 2, 3 lines about what each chapter is and sometimes where I'm going. And sometimes you write later chapters earlier and earlier chapters later and you fit it all together. But what you're always trying to do is find out what the story, where's the story going? What's it trying to tell me it wants? And you have to get used to throwing a lot of stuff away. It's quite liberating to be able to say, okay, that was fine, but it doesn't work for this story. I mean, I've got an example of that, if you like.
yes.
I worked with a great Broadway director called Albert Marr, who created Kismet and Man of La Mancha. And in Broadway, the director is the center. Everyone reports to him. The musician, the lyricist, no, librettist, sorry, book writer, and the lyricist, they all report to the director, and he decides what happens. And so we were doing a not very good musical in England, which I was called in to be to fix the script with, and I got to work with Albie, which was the great thing. And we needed lyrics, and we didn't have a lyricist. I mean, Lionel Bart came in with like 2 lines, but he was obviously slightly gone, and he had one beautiful little tune that Albie said, "That's the best thing we've got." We didn't have a composer; it was chaos. But so I said, well, I write lyrics, and I could see him thinking, oh God, someone else who thinks they know what they're doing. But by then he knew enough to trust me. So I went. The first couple of lyrics I wrote were okay. They were both comic songs. They fit fine. The point of the story I'm coming to is I took him the third lyric, and I thought, oh, wonder what he thinks of this. After a day's rehearsal, Albie poured one of his ferocious martinis. We sat there and he read the script, this old lizard from New York, and he looked at it, not a face, not moving. He goes, well, this is fine, but it's for entirely the wrong show. Black belt note, take it away. Yeah, okay, I get it. Perfect. You can't do better than have that kind of honest feedback. So yeah, sometimes you write the wrong thing in the wrong place, or the
Yeah,
right thing in the wrong place.
yeah, that's a pretty good American accent, by the way. I mean, usually
I've,
I've noticed that there are two kinds of British accents when there are two kinds of American accents that Brits do. Sometimes you can't really tell. Sometimes it is so clear that it may be American, but where in America is
yes, exactly. Well,
it?
and sometimes you get the Americans doing English accents the same. You go, oh, nearly.
Exactly.
Good try, love. I mean, it's the same. It's the same language divided by,
Yeah.
tiny little nuances of things. And of course, whereabouts in America, whereabouts in England. I've just been doing the audio book. Well, I did it a few months ago for New Rock, New Roll, and I can do the local British accents, the country folk and the street people, and I can do the hero because he's basically me, the narrator, is a retired guy playing video games who suddenly just discovers he's young and heroic and a battle mage and completely screwed. So I could do me. I could do the Australian accent for the orc because that's totally natural, mate, for us, But the uh, Asian American girl, who's the third leg of the triangle, and
Yeah.
she's a great character. I struggle with. So my producer Fred Sanders did the Game of Thrones books, at least the last one, and he's a really helpful, very kind director. And he just says, "Well, just go for it." get some pronunciation tips from him. And I sort of indicate it. It's all right. I'm not trying too hard to make it perfect. So people kind of, any more than I'm trying too much to sound like a girl,
Right.
because like when I was reading to my daughter when I was a kid and when she was a kid, you do the accents a bit or the voices a bit, but not too much. So some of them are easier than others. I mean, I've lived in California 30 years and I still speak English-ish.
Well, you're speaking very well. I have two things to say. One about daughters. So my first novel again is The Silk Code, and before it has actually been published, I'm reading the manuscript. I leave it on the kitchen table. My our daughter Molly, who then was about 12 years old, gets up earlier than anybody else in the house, sits down and reads the novel. And when I come downstairs, she said two things to me. She said, Daddy, this is the best novel I ever read. And I tried
Ah.
in vain to get the publisher to put, the blurb on top. But then she said, hey, Daddy Phil D'Amato, who is the lead character, he's just like you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then I have to, there are a couple of not, the most explicit scenes, but nothing I would want my 12-year-old daughter to read. But nonetheless, she read it. So the moral of that story is don't leave a novel on a table. But the other thing I just want to say, as far as
Great story.
yeah,
Lovely.
it's doing accents. So actually, I just had a novel published myself. It's Real Life and Alternate History of the Beatles, which
Oh,
was
yeah.
which was developed from a short story. It's real life. And that, before the novel was published, was made into a radio play. So all this is building up to is the lead character in the novel and in the radio play is a unfortunately late disc jockey from WFUV Radio, that's Fordham University's radio station, by the name of Pete Fornatel. I don't know if the name sounds familiar.
Not to me.
He was one of the main people who brought progressive rock to FM stations in the 1960s, and he was a great disc jockey, died too young. Anyway, so someone contacted me, says, hey, I want to do a radio play out of this. I said, yeah, that sounds great. And he said, well, who would you suggest to play Pete Fornatel? And, it was just like one of these things. I hadn't really thought about it before. And I said, well, how about me?
Yeah.
And, and so but the good news there was I didn't have to worry about an accent because Fornatel was born in the Bronx. I
Yeah.
was born in the Bronx. So, maybe somebody in his family would say that doesn't quite sound like Pete, but
You're
so
not trying to. In the audiobook of Along the Cherry Lane, which was Milt's biography, I do me, and Fred Sanders, the producer who just done my audiobook, reads Milt because I've got all Milt's tapes, but they're very slow, and to edit them together would have been a labor of love. And Fred does it more kind of like an actor would, more bouncy. So yeah, you don't have to sound exactly like the person. I've seen 10 great Hamlets in my life, and they're all different.
that's a good analogy. So uh, just to sort of wrap this up, I mean, I'm asking you this question, but I'm sure I know the answer already, but I'd be interested in what you have to say about this. I assume that you, in addition to writing the sequels, are wanting to make this into what? A movie, a television series, something more than the words on the screen or the page or the.
But yeah, yeah, oddly enough, I mean, I've sold the film rights to an English producer, a friend who's we've worked on other things before, and he's very keen on it. He's got a bankroll. We'll have to see it happen. I've written the screenplay for him, and oddly enough, I said there's too much in this book. It's 450 pages or something. There's a lot happens. Shouldn't it be a TV series? And he said, well, actually, the streaming world's, what people want now is two hours of fun. They don't want to get stuck in a series that goes on forever. So he says, well, do it as two movies like Dune. So I went away and wrote the first half, and that fitted. And then when we had a meeting a couple of months later, I said, "Look, Dune's a classic. They've never heard of me. I mean, why would they stick around for the second half? Dune, they know that's already got a fan base. I think we're aiming wrong." So I had another crack at it and got the movie down to 121 pages. A minute a page. That's a 2-hour movie. So early stages yet. It doesn't mean anything until the next stage and the next stage and the thousands after that, but it certainly cracks along. I mean, what I like to do one of my test readers, a producer here in LA, said I think on the fourth book, she said, "Oh, I read it all in a weekend." It take me a year and a half to write. It's over 500 pages. She just skipped through it, and that's great. I want to write page turners that have you by the neck and drag you along with them. That's my idea. And story structure to me and narrative drive is the height of good writing. I mean, I enjoy literary fiction as well. I enjoy also narrative nonfiction. I enjoy, documentaries as well as drama. But narrative drive and story structure to me are the pinnacle of what makes a good writer.
Yeah, well, I agree with you completely. And what we'll have to do whenever that movie comes out is we'll do another interview about the movie.
That'd be
And
lovely. Or when
that,
the sequel's coming out in the book two's coming out in November, I believe. Kasich are going to publish it then. So
okay,
I'll be back.
all right, good. I'm glad. Well, listen, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. You're an
Oh,
amazing person in terms of all the work you've done, and you really have made a difference in all
but
kinds of ways in our popular culture.
Well, it's very kind of you to say so, Paul. I appreciate the compliment. Thank you. It's been very nice being here. And did you finish the book or did you start it or did you? I hope you enjoy it when you get there. Don't answer.
No, no, I did finish the book, and
Yeah,
I didn't want to talk about specific parts of the book because I
yeah.
always worried about giving anything away, and it went very, very quickly. So I look, there's no greater compliment that an author can get when the reader says, you ruined a night's sleep for me, and
If I
your
did
book,
that,
yeah, it did that with me certainly to some extent.
well,
So
I think I heard you say I loved it. Well, that's all. The old joke about all any writer expects from any critic is 2,000 words of closely reasoned praise. Course, we, you know, it's really nice when someone likes your work and you realize there's somebody at the other end of it. I write it to be as good as it can be, but when somebody else gets on board and like my 12-year-old neighbor in London, I just sent him the second book because he was begging for it. I said, don't send it to anyone else. We haven't been with the editor yet. And he sent me a lovely report on it. But when people want it,
yes.
that's just thrilling. Yeah.
No, it's absolutely. Just one, final thing from me. I remember when my first novel was published. So I'm here in New York City, and in those days, this was maybe, yeah, I guess it was actually maybe Amazon existed, but certainly in a much smaller form than it is now. So it was all about bookstores, Barnes and Noble. There was a chain called Borders. I used to, anytime I was anywhere where there was a bookstore, I'd walk into the bookstore, I'd see, okay, first of all, do they have my book? Yes. And then like a lunatic, like some kind of, incipient stalker, I'd hang out in the bookstore and just hope and wait that somebody would come over and pick up my book. And the truth of the matter is, I was in Pennsylvania about 6 months later in a relatively small Barnes and Noble near, I guess, in the outskirts of Scranton, Pennsylvania. And it happened to me a total of one time. I was
Ah,
I'm looking, and I see this young woman walks by, and she goes right over to the science fiction section. That's good. She picks, the book up. She's looking at it, and then I'm thinking, "Oh my God, what am I going to do?" She puts it back, but she walks off with a smile on her face, and I was almost tempted to go over and say to her, "I'm the author, and I'm happy to sign for you," but I decided not to because I didn't want to like sort of
freak
frighten.
her out. No, it's her choice. It would look like you'd like palmed it. There's
Right.
magicians who make you pick the right card. You forced it on her. That's a lovely story.
Yeah.
I've got. I mean, if you want to stop now, we can stop. But I got stories about it, the other side of it when, you know.
Tell us. Go
Oh
ahead.
well.
Really.
So it was something I wrote a long time ago. Somebody in a pub, they came sat at my table. One of them quoted a line from it, a sketch. And I just looked, I'm sorry, I've never heard myself quoted in public before. I wrote that. And she said, no, you didn't. I said, what? She said, no, no, you didn't. My friend did. He's a friend of mine and dropped a name. I said, but I wrote it. Look, I've got the manuscript at home. And she thought I was trying to impress her. I just couldn't get, so I got no credit at all for it. So perhaps if you'd asked that lady in Pennsylvania if you could sign it, she might have said, oh, I'm going to send this to my worst enemy. I hate her. Something like Anyway, that's a nice story.
That's a good twist. I bought this book because I really hate this person. I'm going to
Yeah.
send this person this book as a present. Yeah.
I'm going to cut out all the inside and fill it with dog
Yeah,
turds and
yeah.
set it fire and put it on her front porch.
Well, I do have actually one story that's sort of related to that. I'm at a science fiction convention, and I think actually it was the same novel, The So Code. And so I'm sitting like at an author's table, happily signing, books that people are bringing up to sign to
Right.
me. And I swear to God, some guy comes up to me, and I can see he's not that friendly, not that happy, and like in a sort of grumpy way says, "Would you mind signing this?" I said, "Okay." And I sort of looked at him, and he said, "Look, I paid money for this book. I didn't like it at all. I might as well at least get your signature on it, so maybe it'll be worth something." I said, "Okay, okay,
I love it.
yeah,
American capitalism at its finest. You know, that's called making lemonade, right?
yeah, exactly right.
When you read a lemon of a book, get the
Yeah.
author to sign it, and maybe it'll be worth something. One author told me, he said, I've signed so many books, I'm sure the ones I haven't signed are worth more than the ones I have because they're rarer.
We want to hear some other terrible story. So I'm up. We have a place up on Cape Cod, and we go there every year. And there actually used to be a lot of small bookstores around
Yeah,
there, and including even there was this place that basically just sold nothing but used paperbacks. So I would go in, and being a science fiction fan, I could buy like 10 or 15 of them if I hadn't
yeah,
read them before, and get them for like 50 cents each. Anyway. You probably don't, or maybe you do know who Damon Knight was. He was a
yeah. I
science.
remember the name. Yeah,
Okay, Damon Knight, right. He actually is probably best known for the Twilight Zone episode that was based on his short story To Serve Man, in which it turns out that that's literally what the aliens are going to be doing with the human beings.
did he write this before or after The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis in the 50s? Because that's the same thing.
Well, that's interesting. This is early 50s. It's
Yeah.
possible. I
But they
should,
had the same idea at the same time.
yeah,
But when they
yeah,
get to the giants in Narnia, it's
yeah,
just how to serve man, and then they realize
yeah.
it's a cookbook.
Yeah, well, it's literally the same story. I'll have to check into that. I hadn't because I haven't read much C.S. Lewis. But anyway, so I buy a whole bunch of books. I bring them back to our cottage. I'm looking through them, and here I open up a book and I see that it's signed by Damon Knight to an unknown person. It was like a guy. So like dear John, I hope you enjoy the book. Yours, Damon Knight. And here it is in a used bookstore. And so fortunately, I think Damon at that point was too old. I wouldn't have told him anyway to even understand what happened. But just think about that kind of like, insult. That someone who you signed a book, you would think they would treasure it for the rest of their life. They dump it in some pile at a used bookstore.
Oh, you could put a spin on that.
Yeah.
The man died. His
Yeah.
estate was cleared out by heartless estate clearer out of people. He had left it intestate in his will, which is found later. Take my precious copy of Damon Knight's book and give it to the give it to the Smithsonian because it's incredibly. But no, it's thwarted. You know.
Oh wow! So one last story. For me, I had a book called Electronic Chronicles. That was a nonfiction book. I wanted Mikhail Gorbachev to read it, but I didn't know how to get it to him. So I was at a conference at Hofstra University here in New York, and there was some guy from the then Soviet Union, at the conference. And I said, "Look, this might be an idiotic question, but I have a book in which there's an essay in there about Mikhail Gorbachev, and I'd love to." Have him get a copy. I don't know if I mail it to him, there's no way he's going to get it. And the guy in a heavy rush, I said, sure, sure, I'll make sure he gets it. I dedicate it to, write a little nice thing to Mikhail Gorbachev. About 20 years later, I get an email from someone in London who says, I just bought this book in a bookshop here in London. And are you the Paul Levinson who wrote this book? I said, yeah. And I said, so why are you contacting me? You enjoyed the book? He said, well, no, not so much that. I haven't started reading it. I see that you inscribed it to Mikhail Gorbachev. And this is where it wound up.
Ah,
So
yeah, best laid plans of mice and men.
that's
Uh,
fun.
life is all over the place, isn't it? That's why we use stories because stories make sense.
Yes.
Stories have completion, and then we can go back to weird old reality.
So listen to our viewers, right after I say goodbye to Richard and we end this interview, just keep watching the screen for a split second. You're going to see a nice big picture of New Rock, New Roll. And
As
so,
one other thing I can say, Paul, if people
so,
go to my website, richardsparks.com, no E, www.richardsparks.com, there you can get a free sample, audio sample of me reading an excerpt, or a free physical chapter you can download to your as PDF to your reader, Kindle, iPad, whatever, and that'll give you a taste. They're both quite amusing chapters in the adventure. So get a taste of what's going on, and if you like it, you can see if you want to buy the other 37 chapters. But at least you get a free look at it.
all right, that's a great thing for people to know. So thank you, Richard. We'll talk again next November.
In November, yes, that's lovely, Paul. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
My pleasure.